Think about any other animal on Earth. Bears have thick fur, birds have insulating feathers, and seals have dense blubber. But if you take a human and drop them into a freezing environment, they have zero natural armor. We are the only creature that relies entirely on external materials just to survive outside. It wasn't always a disadvantage. Our earliest ancestors evolved in the intense heat of Africa. Over hundreds of thousands of years, they lost nearly all their body hair, which gave them a distinct advantage. Bare skin allowed them to sweat and cool down efficiently, turning them into endurance hunters who could track and outrun prey over vast distances under the scorching sun. This map shows the early human migration paths, starting roughly 300,000 years ago. You can see populations moving outward, leaving the warm African climate and pushing north into the uncharted territories of Europe and Asia. Looking at the temperature data overlapping these routes, you can see a sudden drop. These migrating groups walked directly into the conditions of an ice age. Temperatures plummeted. Snow and ice dominated the landscape. Instantly, the bare skin that had allowed them to conquer the savanna became a fatal vulnerability. Biology works incredibly slowly. Waiting for evolution to gradually grow a thick coat of fur back over their bodies would take hundreds of thousands of years. For the tribes facing these freezing winds right then and there, waiting meant extinction. They needed an immediate solution. To avoid freezing to death, these early humans had to invent the concept of external technology. They had to find a way to manually patch a flaw in their own biology. Imagine stepping out into this frozen, ice-covered expanse with nothing but bare skin. The wind cuts right through you, plummeting your core body temperature. A hunter might have noticed that the underside of an elk pelt remained warm to the touch long after the animal had died. If that fur acted as a barrier against the mountain wind for the animal, they realized it could perform the same function for a human body. The execution was crude. Hunters took heavy, raw animal hides and simply draped them over their shoulders, tying them off with loose vines or strips of leather. These raw hides were heavy. They were uncomfortable, and they certainly smelled terrible. But as a functional thermal shield, they worked. They trapped enough body heat to stop frostbite, keeping the wearer alive for another day. Draping a heavy skin over your shoulders has a major mechanical flaw. The moment a strong gust of wind hits, the loose hide blows open, exposing your chest to freezing air. For surviving deep, prolonged winter freezes, loose wraps were entirely insufficient. Roughly 40,000 years ago, humans engineered a solution: the bone needle. By carving a tiny hole into a splinter of bone, a person could thread it with animal tendons, allowing them to splice skin tightly together. This single tool meant garments could now be fitted to the human body. Stitched seams eliminated the gaps where cold air could enter, wrapping the torso, arms, and legs in a continuous, heat-trapping seal. Creating tightly fitted insulation solved the heat loss problem. Armed with stitched clothing, human populations could finally survive the lethal sub-zero temperatures deep inside Siberia and northern Europe. As the Ice Age ended, the massive, thick-furred mammals that humans relied on began to disappear. The warming planet forced these megafauna into extinction or pushed them far to the north. When humans eventually settled into agricultural communities, they needed a more consistent, renewable source of material than a dwindling supply of wild pelts. People learned that by soaking plant stalks like flax or combing out the wool from domesticated sheep, they could isolate individual fibers. By twisting these fibers together between their palms or on a wheel, they could create a single continuous strand of thread. The bone needle was eventually replaced by complex wooden looms. Instead of painstakingly stitching small pieces of leather together, operators could rapidly interlace thousands of vertical and horizontal threads to create large, cohesive sheets of fabric. Woven textiles were light, breathable, and easily adaptable to different climates. Clothing stopped being just a heavy, restrictive survival burden and finally evolved into a much more comfortable, breathable, and flexible second skin. For thousands of years, weaving remained a slow, manual process. The Industrial Revolution replaced handcrafting with mechanical systems that automated the looms. Driven by steam and eventually electricity, factory machines began churning out millions of identical garments at speeds that were previously impossible. Fabric became cheap, abundant, and easily accessible to the average person. Because survival was practically guaranteed and garments were so easy to acquire, people began using clothing to display their cultural identity, social status, and personal taste. This scale of production birthed modern fashion, often masking the original life-saving purpose of a shirt or a jacket under layers of color and design. But that ancient engineering tradition of building an artificial environment for the human body is still very much alive. When modern explorers push into extreme territories like the absolute zero temperatures of space, they rely on highly specialized suits to keep their biology functioning. You see the exact same logic in the thermal suits protecting deep-sea divers from freezing ocean depths, or the heavy, dense, heat-resistant gear that shields firefighters from burning buildings. Whether it is a pressurized spacesuit or just a simple cotton shirt, the logic remains the same. Every garment is a tool designed to regulate our temperature and shield our skin, a continuous line of invention that allowed us to take a body evolved for the tropics and move it to every corner of the planet.